Okay, so welcome everyone, those that are here live and anyone watching this on playback. And we're almost into the month of September. So I probably sound like a broken record when I say this, probably every month. I'm sure you hear this every month now. Quite a month coming up. And in more positive ways, I feel. And again, if you've read the forecast already, you might have got that sense from what I wrote, that there are some more positive transitions, shifts going on. The planets stationing, Saturn and Jupiter both stationing direct. And nearly all of the planets, bar Venus, really in very strong positions, like very strong. They're in their own signs. So there's a lot of strengths available in September, for sure. Now, but strong doesn't always mean easy. This is one of the conundrums of 2020, because even like last year, while I was looking forward at 2020, and I was thinking, God, there's so many strong transits going on this year. I wasn't necessarily thinking that's going to be all great, like all sunshine and roses. Because when you have what are termed the malefics, the cruel planets, very strong, of course, they impress upon us more so. And they can overcome the more kind planets. When you think about Venus, Venus is very soft in nature. And if you're ever in company, for example, if you're at a dinner party and you have a very Venusian type of person sitting in a dinner party, and you have a lot of Mars and Saturn type of people and the nodes sitting around the dinner party, that Venus type of person is going to feel quite challenged in that situation, trying to almost negotiate and be the diplomat in trying to balance everything out, because that's what Venus type of people like to do. But they're not going to be able to, because the Mars and the Saturn and the nodes overcome Venus very easily. And this is kind of the situation we're having in September. So the Mars is quite brute force and, quite aggressive even at times. And Saturn could be quite antagonistic, right? That's one expression of Saturn, sort of the rebel and questioning everything. So Venus, the diplomat, would be very hard pressed to keep peace in that case. And so Venus this month is going to enter Cancer, and it becomes then really challenging for Venus, because Venus is aspected by all three malefics, the major three malefics: Rahu, Saturn, and Mars. Those three are the most troublesome. So whatever area of your life that Cancer represents in your chart, as well as whatever areas of your life Venus represent, i.e. Taurus and Libra, all of those are going to feel this pressure from these three bullies in a way. So there are good aspects, of course, to these characters as well. And imagine if you were sitting at that dinner party where there's these Mars and Saturn and Node and all of these type of people sitting around the dinner party. If they're feeling strong, they're not as likely to be as troublesome. That's one side of it. They're going to behave themselves in a way that's more, they're feeling strong, so they don't really need to lash out as much. So that is certainly the case for Saturn. Saturn is very strong in Capricorn, and all of the good qualities of Saturn are coming out more this year. And we'll see things turn around in this respect as well, as Saturn starts to station by the end of the month and move forward. When it's retrograde, although it's very strong, it's not expressed as easily. So Saturn is quite challenging right now for us all. And then Rahu is very strong, but Rahu, at first-rate malefic, it's seen as the most malefic in Indian astrology. When it's so strong, we don't always know what's happening because it's a shadow. It's an eclipse. So it's usually quite subversive and sort of very challenging in ways that we can't put our finger on. It's like that person who kind of challenges us and pushes our buttons, and we don't know why, really. So Mars, at the same time then, even though very strong, is about to station retrograde. And this is the most complex signature of September and moving on into the next few months. So when Mars goes retrograde, it's like not being able to freely express our will. And when we feel that will suppressed in any way, we will likely feel that through frustration at the very least, but outright aggression at the most. So we'll see this obviously in events around the world that are quite explosive through actual events, but also in our own interpersonal relations. So we need to be very mindful of all this, because all of these planets, as I mentioned, are aspecting 100% aspect on Venus. So you see here that Saturn is across from Cancer, where Venus is about to move into, and then Mars aspects 4 signs from itself, and Rahu aspects the 12th from itself. Remember, Rahu has been transiting here previously in Cancer. So while it's in Gemini, it's like it's leaving its shadow behind. So it aspects the 12th from where it sits, as well as the 5th and the 9th. So all 3 of these malefics are now aspecting Venus in Cancer in September. So it's just kind of a signature of the month that there is some strengths. There's many strengths. Nearly all of the planets, bar Venus, are in very strong positions. But because it's only Venus that's not strong, but in fact is quite challenged, we might feel this month as challenging. So I'm sorry to be a bit of a, at the first instance, you might think, oh, September's great. Things are moving forward. Everything's strong. We're feeling great. But there's a problem. And the problem is Venus. And so we have to be mindful of that in all of our interactions, of course. And yes, it's a great time for getting things moving, for turning things around, for achieving things. But it's also time we need to be very patient with these things that are very slowly turning around. And then again, as Mars moves back, while the other planets move forward, we have to be very patient with that, because Mars is about to create a lot of intense heat, and that's not going to be able to be expressed that easily when it's retrograde. So quite a lot to look at in September as a result. So I'll go day by day as I normally do, and then afterwards, after I stop recording, if you have any personal questions, any general questions, please feel free. So in a couple of days, you'll see that on Tuesday, we have the 1st of September, the moon is in Aquarius and the sun is in Leo. So by the 2nd, it would be a full moon. And so the full moon phase is in Dhanishta, but it's going to be a full moon in Shatabishak, in the middle of Aquarius. And Shatabishak is literally translated as either the 100 healers or the 100 demons. But at any rate, it's all about healing. And so we have this kind of dynamic going on now with this full moon in this lunar month. The lunar month is Bhadra, but that's because we normally would see, it's named after actually the Bhadrapadas that come after it, but it's actually a full moon in Shatabishak. And that's on the 2nd. So let me bring it forward here. So it's around the 2nd. Nothing substantial going on at this time, apart from it being a full moon and itself being quite a more climactic part of the lunar month in a way. It's like this outer expression of the full moon. The new moon starts anew, and it's sort of like withdrawing into ourselves and starting again. The energy tends to dip. It starts to wane into the new moon. For the full moon, it tends to increase and increase more and more. And this is why we need to be very mindful as the energy picks up. And even just being under a full moon, how that can really intensify our feelings in relation to whatever's transpiring at the time. So one of the things I want to note before we go into the other transits now, at this point, all of the planets, like I said, bar Venus, are in strong positions. But while we go ahead here in the next week, for the first week of September, notice that as the moon transits Mars' sign and all these signs here, we need to be very mindful of this, because Mars is about to station. So Mars is really strong right now. And again, strong could be good if you learn how to manage it, but it could also be quite challenging for many. Venus has now moved into Cancer, so it's receiving the aspects from the 1st and 2nd of September. Pretty much Mars and Saturn are exactly on it. So we're really going to feel it those few days next week. And then Mercury by the 2nd has also moved into Virgo, which is another strong position. So we have all the planets in their own signs pretty much, again, except for Venus. So the moon will move into Taurus. Some astrologers give Taurus to the moon as well as Venus. So it's said to rule Taurus, according to some, as well as Cancer. So you could see a situation with all the planets except for Venus in their own signs. So that's a very powerful lineup. And they're all spread out quite evenly, and they're all expressing their own thing, and they're all doing their own thing. So there's a lot going on in September that you could really take advantage of. I won't go on about it, I suppose, because I've written about it in the forecast if you read that, but it's a very good month, of course, September, for organizing our life. And, you know, that's why I feel like this is a new year in many respects that January isn't. You know, it's like it offers up those possibilities more so to be able to organize our life and plan ahead. So anyway, let's keep going forward, and just again, keep an eye on that moon as it's approaching Mars and as it passes Mars and Mars stationing, and that would be one of the key signatures for the month. So we see on the 3rd and the 4th, then the moon, and into the 5th, we have moon in Pisces, aspected by Saturn. Remember that Saturn aspects Venus, as does Mars and Rahu. And now the moon's getting involved in these planets as well. So the moon joins it on the 6th, 7th, and 8th. We have the moon with Mars before it goes into exaltation. And even then it's between Mars and Rahu. So what we're having the first week of the month really is a situation where the two softies, Venus and moon, are quite impacted by these tough guys. So the soft areas of life are more challenged, in other words. And although it's a great time of year, like I said, to organize and plan and schedule and all of that, and to do something that we really need to do that we've been putting off maybe. And even though that requires a lot of going back over things with Mars retrograde, overall, it's just a good month for doing things. It's not a great time necessarily for relationships and, you know, Venus and moon type issues. But if you've been putting off issues just because it doesn't feel good, then it might be a great time. If you haven't been doing something because you haven't felt like doing it, this might be the month to do it. So let's keep going. You have the moon now in its own sign. Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars all in their own sign. Rahu and Ketu, you can see that they're moving ever closer to the edge of that transition, which is another signature for September. And, you know, we've seen enough of that around the world already, and we're going to see a lot more of it. This sense of things being uprooted, of course, with Ketu, and in transition at the same time. This Gandanta, especially between Scorpio and Sagittarius, is particularly triggered right now. And moving forward, as soon as Ketu moves into Scorpio, it will trigger the eclipse, which occurs in December. So Ketu is very active, in other words, and very strong, of course, in its own lunar mansion here, Mula, and then moving into Scorpio by the end of September. So that's another big signature. And Rahu, of course, moving into Taurus. So I've written a lot about that. Hopefully you have read some of that that I've written, and a whole article on that. But one of the things that I was pondering today actually was, you know, because sometimes we can miss the more obvious expressions of these transits. And one of the more obvious ones is that Ketu is particularly challenging for the lunar mansions, because the lunar mansions are represented by the air element. They're how the mind functions. And the fire planets, so Mars in particular, Sun, and Ketu, would impact those in a less positive ways. Let me put it that way. So Ketu, in fact, really disturbs the mind and the lunar mansions. And when we think about the lunar mansion Mula at the beginning of Sagittarius and how Ketu has been here for the last few months, Mula, remember, literally means root. And the sign highlights roots And not just roots in terms of people being uprooted and feeling abandoned or feeling uprooted or a loss or whatever it might be. Roots literally are symbolic of healing herbs, right? So one of the things that's been expressed through this Ketu and Mula transit, which is about to come to an end, is this kind of block in that. And that's going to shift now as Ketu moves out of Mula into Scorpio by the end of September. So hopefully this means that also we'll get this sense of needing to connect with that more, in other words. So connecting to the earth, connecting to plants, connecting to healing herbs, in other words. And also maybe looking at healing in terms of treating this particular virus, but also just treating our health in general, as in building our immunity. So remember, Mula is all about healing herbs and roots. So that's another big signature of the month. There is another signature when we get to it, when the nodes move, which is equally promising and challenging. And that is that Rahu in Taurus, Ketu in Scorpio are seen as exalted. And this is according to the tradition. So we can absolutely, rely on that. And, it's kind of makes sense as well when you think about how Rahu in Taurus is very much about expanding, growing, literally even growing. Taurus is about food, but growing things that make us feel stable, connecting with things like family, community, and food, and valuables and values that we connect with ourselves personally as well. What do we find valuable? So there's an expansion on that theme. And at the same time, Ketu in Scorpio is about to trigger that sense of needing to really go there and to dig deep and to remove the fear that has been so prevalent in recent times. So the other side of that, however, is that the nodes, as we know them now, as hopefully you understand a bit more about them now, also can disrupt things. And it's said again that the Ketu would disrupt the lunar mansions more so. So then we have to keep an eye on Jeshta moving forward, and the kind of strategic sort of controlling nature of Jeshta, as well as the skills of Jeshta, which is being able to try to control everything, or being perceived to try to control everything, and rising above all that and being able to let go of those all those lesser controls, we put it that way, because we're obviously not in control of everything. And that's the challenge for Jeshta. And this is going to be something that Ketu and Jeshta is going to really bring out a lot more. And at the same time, Rahu in Taurus is going to create a lot of blocks here, as is the nature of Rahu. And blocks in terms of, I gave an example, in the article about, famine. We look at it, looking back in the 80s when it was Band-Aid, people literally banding together. Taurus is very much about that, to help people in times of need. So we might see some issues that they're therefore around, I hate saying this, but, it could be, famine or food shortages. So it could be, supply chains being disrupted and all of that. So that could be one issue there with Rahu and Taurus. And at the same time, as I said, Ketu in Scorpio is wanting to rid ourselves of the problems of Scorpio, which is chronic problems. Now, in history, we've seen that these transits have brought solutions to problems as much as they have problems. So there's two sides of it. So the examples I gave in the article, of course, were, the genome project was completed when Ketu moved into Scorpio. It's about understanding things, investigating, researching things, and figuring them out. And because now we're not talking about war times necessarily, we're talking about a war on this virus, then we're really going to be looking at more of that story playing out, and how Ketu and Scorpio could lead to more advances in tackling the virus, However, again, with the nodes, you have to always look at the other side of that. And the other side of that, unfortunately, is the possibility of the virus mutating, which is another indication of Ketu and Scorpio. Jyeshtha is all about transmutation of energy. So there's always some turning something into something else. And Ketu is a virus, remember? So we have to be mindful of that possibility as well. So I'm not trying not to sugarcoat anything here, but I'm also trying not to make it sound like it's all doom and gloom, because I do think that there is some positive results from all of these transits moving forward. And certainly there are a lot better position for them in Taurus and Scorpio, absolutely. So it's a much better situation, but we have to be mindful of all the other possibilities as well, and the kind of things that are the problems that are created by trying to solve one problem, which is what the nodes show. So there's a lot going on. As you can see, I haven't even got into the first week. So there's a lot going on in September. So anyway, the moon will join Rahu on the 11th and 12th. We obviously need to be mindful of that every time. And you see now that, let me go back to the 10th, you see that Mars is stationed. So it stations at 4 degrees of Aquarius. It just made it to 4 degrees, and it will move back to 21 degrees of Pisces by the 14th of November. So we're in this for the long haul. Obviously being mindful of what Aries and Scorpio represent in your own chart. Those two areas of your life will be going under a lot of review. The best thing always, I feel, with Mars retrograde, and if you have read the article, you'd be familiar with the fact that I have it in my chart myself. I have Mars retrograde in Aries here, very close to this degree. And it has been equally good and challenging. Good because I have a lot of energy usually, and I use it, constructively usually, because I'm very mindful of it. But in my younger years, it was very explosive and impulsive, and I made a lot of mistakes in my life. So it's that kind of build up of energy, and it has nowhere to go, and it sort of wants to just explode. It has to explode at some point. So it's really important, obviously, to manage this, and especially because it's in a square to Saturn. It's asking us to do that. One of the things that I noticed in the news more than anything overall, I mean, there's so many things happening, of course, all the time, but the one major theme that seems to be going on right now is this conflict, or let me even just say contrast, between Mars in Aries and Saturn in Capricorn. Again, the square aspect is very prominent there. And Mars in Aries is all about freedom, to do what you want when you want. And we can think of Mars as a youth, because it literally is seen as someone youthful, right? That's the archetype of Mars. Saturn, on the other hand, is doing what you should be doing, or you're told to be doing, whichever, because Saturn could be in imposition. It's like imposed upon you, or Saturn is your own, imposing on yourself this restriction, right? So whether it's the government or it's yourself, because you think that's the right thing to do, Saturn is the restriction. And Saturn archetypally is the old man. So if you have a youth Mars in direct conflict or contrast to the old person here, Saturn, doing the right thing, I mean, this is really what's going on in the world. You've got people who basically do not want to be restricted, and that's Mars in Aries. So that's what that is all about, and the need to express that freedom. And at the same time, you've got all of this fear in Saturn and the restriction, and doing the right thing, which is what Capricorn is about. And it's just conflicted for that reason. Now, Mars, obviously, as free as it wants to be right now, is not completely free. Because as soon as it stations retrograde, it's like putting it back in shackles and asking it to step back. So you've gone far enough now, we need to pull you back. And so you'll see this in the world from the middle of September for the next few weeks, where people will feel like they're being pushed back, and their freedoms and so on are challenged. And this will, of course, be reflected in, again, this square in terms of very tense situations around the world, most obviously. But in terms of your own life, you can look at it where, again, this is happening in your life and how or what you need to actually be going back over. And if you go back over what you need to be doing, then it's not as conflicted. You know what you need to do, you do the right thing, and you stay within the bounds. But at the same time, you have something to do, but it's something to redo. Remember, always with Mars. So that anyway is the general theme for September. Let me go through the rest of the month probably more quickly. The moon reaches Venus, opposition to Saturn, and aspect from Mars and Rahu. Be mindful of those couple of days there on the 13th, 14th, 15th. And also be mindful at this stage that Jupiter has now stationed direct on the 13th. So Jupiter. Despite Jupiter's strength at this time, we all get a sense of, and we all know this, and in conversations with people who have no eye on astrology and what's coming up, people know what's coming down the line. And we all know deep down that there is going to be some backlash from what's happening right now, and it's going to be a long winter in many ways. And we need to prepare ourselves for that now. Because Jupiter, in any strength that it has in Sagittarius, which is very strong, it is hampered somewhat by being in between K2 and Pluto. It has to meet with Pluto one more time in November, and then it goes into Capricorn. And then as soon as it goes into Capricorn, it's going to meet with Saturn in December. So there's a bit of a long winter ahead of us. And so it's very important that we stick it out for the long term here over the winter months, and that we prepare ourselves September, October for this, whatever this is. I don't know what it would mean in terms of practically if it's another lockdown. There are lockdowns happening all the time, of course, but there is certainly a slowdown and there's certainly a downturn. Now, whether that also means economically a recession on, the tail end of this year, it's likely. But more than that, it's more that this sense of losing hope. And so it's important in September and October to instill that sort of vision that you have, because one of the things about Sagittarius, fiery sign, and Jupiter is very much about a vision, an ideal. So to plant in your mind now for the long term, for the long haul, a vision that you have in respect to Jupiter, what Jupiter rules in your chart. And in general, and to keep the faith even while Jupiter goes into Capricorn, because it's not all bad. It's not all bad, but it's going to be challenging. It's not all bad because Saturn is there and it's going to help it out. It's like a good thing coming out of a bad situation, ultimately. And we will be thankful for it in the end. But there is some things to go through yet. And again, especially because Jupiter now moving forward, it's giving us that fuel, that inspiration, that fire, that vision to move forward. But it still has to meet with Pluto and unearth a lot more things and increase the death toll, which is another indication of Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in November. And then this economic downturn, as I mentioned, and this kind of pretty much a downturn in December, especially when it comes together with Saturn. But again, a good thing coming out of a bad situation from that. So use this period, in other words, with Jupiter and Sagittarius in September and October, moving forward, to fuel yourself for the winter. When you talk about winter and you're preparing for the winter, the autumn months are great in that way because it's all about stocking up and hoarding up, maybe even, but stocking up and preparing and going into that more quiet space, as the year starts to wane. But I'm talking about more so the inspiration that will keep you through the winter. What inspires you to feed yourself that inspiration with Jupiter now strong and moving forward in Sagittarius. So whatever that might be for you. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving on, and I want to get to your questions as well. So moving through the rest of the month, we see that by the 15th, moon will join the sun, and by the 16th, there will be a new moon. 17th, we have the new moon. So the moon is actually at the very beginning of, bring it back a few hours, 0 degrees of Virgo. So this new moon in Virgo on the 17th of September is, you know, as every month is a new beginning. And this is also the transition between Leo and Virgo, and very much about, well, what vision you have for yourself, what inspires you and what you want to do, and very much about what you want to do personally. The fire signs are very much about subjective experience. Bringing that into the domain now of Virgo, where it's about planning that and scheduling it and organizing yourself. And again, combined with the Jupiter station moving forward now in Sagittarius and the inspiration we get from that, this is a very powerful month to inspire ourselves and also to organize ourselves for the months ahead. So if you have a project you're working on, if you have an idea you've been formulating, if you've got something going on, this is a great month to actually put it into practice, or at least plan it, and schedule it, and actually put it in your diary and say, I'm going to do this, this, and this in this month and this month and this month moving forward. So this is what September is all about, I feel. So that's the new moon on the 17th. It's in the sign Uttara Falguni. It's the latter Falguni, the latter fruitful one, and it's usually a very fruitful day as well. All of the Uttaras are, and you might notice this if you follow them throughout the months, that all the Uttaras are, the latter ones, are very stable signs, you know, and they're very nice. You know, there's usually a very nice feel about the day. So you have the Uttara Falguni here, bridging Leo and Virgo. You have the Uttara Shada, bridging Sagittarius and Capricorn. And then you have the Uttara Bhadrapada, which is in Pisces. So they're all very stable signs. So this new moon is more stable. Let me just, okay. So yeah, a much more, it's a stable new moon, in other words, and it's in this sign Uttara Falguni, which is the god, is very much about the god of contracts and friendships and commitment, and you know, it's the marriage star, you know, so it's very much about making contracts, making agreements. So again, it's just indicating a good time to, if you're inspired to do something, or you have an idea to do something, to actually maybe get into kind of an agreement with others about that as well for this new moon, and planet. So that's the new moon on the 17th. So let me keep going forward. On the 18th, 19th, we have the moon then moving into Libra on the 19th. Remember, Virgo, or Mercury in Virgo, this whole time from the 2nd to the 22nd of September, so most of the month, is just very strong, particularly strong, and we're going to be very focused on organizing our lives and planning things anyway. And Venus is starting to move or Mercury is moving very fast now. It's getting ahead of the sun, and so we're planning ahead. It's all about moving forward and planning ahead. One thing to be mindful of, though, as soon as Mercury moves into Libra, and you notice that the moon is now moved into Scorpio, and by the 22nd, moon is in Scorpio and Mercury has moved into Libra opposite Mars. So this will be one to be paying attention to on the 22nd, 23rd, that where, you know, our mind, of course, is influenced by moon and Mercury more than any other planet. Of course, they're the mind planets, the analytical and the emotional, Mercury and moon. And so Mercury opposite Mars could lead to some frustration and expressing that verbally or in any which way. And then as we're feeling sort of the moon in Scorpio and the vulnerability of that, that could easily, you know, trigger that also. And Mars has an aspect on the moon here, of course. So just be mindful of communication by the 22nd, 23rd of September. This is also the equinox. And this is very much about finding our balance as well. But the balance between Mars and Mercury is quite a hard one to achieve, because they just don't get on. Mercury is all about thinking, planning, scheduling. Mars is like, do it already. So this could be quite frustrating. So that's the 22nd, 23rd. And then on the 24th, I'm going to use the mean nodes here. So you could use the true nodes and they'll have moved on the 19th, but on the 24th, certainly they will have moved. Rahu will have moved into Taurus, Ketu into Scorpio. So they're still at this kind of juncture between signs. Remember, especially the Ketu juncture is quite sensitive. And this is going to go on for a while. In fact, you could say the whole of the month. And so it's not, okay, now K2's in Scorpio and that's it. It's not you wake up in the next morning and it's a whole new story. Of course, that's not it. And there are no lines in the sky. So there's no clarity here around like K2's now in Scorpio. It's going to take a while for this more subtle aspect of the horoscope to express itself to us, because it's a shadow aspect. So it's not immediately obvious anyway. So just be very mindful of this subtler shift, I would say, by the end of the month, the last week of September. But as I said before, I do think that this is a more stable, a more helpful even transit of the nodes. And depending on what these areas of your life are, of course, generally, as I always say, Rahu is where we are geared towards, what we pay our attention to. But we're balanced more this time because Ketu is in its own sign, Scorpio. So as much as we may neglect this part of the chart in some ways, it's not always a bad thing, because we're also willing to do the work here. Ketu, like I said, is at home, so it's more willing to do what it needs to do. So research and all of that is really pronounced here with Ketu and Scorpio. So anyway, I won't go more into that because I've spoken a lot about it already, I guess, and I've written a lot about it. If you read the article on the nodes, that's up on the website now, the whole article, and for each sign. So just going through the last few days of the month, I guess we have the moon at this stage, of course, is crossing over that boundary as well. So that would be, that whole last week of September really is quite a sensitive one, with Mars and Mercury opposite, and the nodes moving and moon moving across that juncture between Scorpio and Sagittarius, meeting K2. I think this is going to actually show a bit of what's coming down the line as well, because as soon as K2 steps into Scorpio, again, it's triggering the eclipse pretty much, because the eclipse is at 28 degrees. It's pretty much on the eclipse degree. Even though the eclipse doesn't happen till the 14th of December, it's getting triggered straight away. And we will see this, as I mentioned in my post and all of that, more obviously in the world through events, but just to be mindful of it in ourselves and what's being triggered in our own chart. Because whatever, of course, these two signs represent for you personally is where you'll be making changes in the next year and a half. And the changes will start straight away because of this K2 moving over the degree of the eclipse. So 24th, 25th, we have the moon in Sagittarius, and then the moon, as it is at the moment, comes back to Capricorn 26th, meets with Saturn 27th. And then a few days later, as the moon moves into Aquarius, Saturn has station direct on the 29th. So this is another big shift going on in the month. So many changes really happening all month. All the planets are changing, either changing signs or changing direction. So there's a lot of change in September. Saturn stations on the 29th, and that's a very slow station, as the planet doesn't appear to move at all for 5 days before and after. So you could even say a week before and after. So really the last week of September, the first week of October, Saturn is not moving. It's not appearing to move. So if you have any planets or any sensitive degrees at 1 degree of Sagittarius, it's really important to slow down, pay attention, remedy this situation as much as possible, because Saturn, I mean, it's not always a bad thing. My ascendant degree a few years ago, Saturn stationed on it, you know, and in actual fact, I almost feel like, okay, why me? But this is going to sound a bit like why me, but in all of the years gone by, Saturn stations. So Saturn stations at a particular degree every year. And for every sign that I have a planet in, the moon, the sun, Saturn stationed the exact degree on every single thing. The moon, the sun, it's like, okay, am I chosen for this, Saturn? And Saturn is challenging and has been in many ways, but my awareness of it made it so much easier. So there's nothing to be fearful of here. If you have planets at 1 degree or around 1 degree of Capricorn, with your awareness, it's just that. It's just being aware of needing to slow down and needing to remedy this situation somewhat in relation to that planet. The tendency for Saturn is, and the tricky thing about Saturn, of course, is what they term in Indian astrology Stambhana Shakti, which is this power or energy to block things. And so we just need to be mindful of that. We need to keep things moving, because if things slow down too much and get blocked and they lose their rhythm, we need to kind of keep it moving. And you could say, from another more philosophical point of view, that Saturn represents past life issues, of course, and that we're paying back them issues now. And by experiencing, these things, that's the payback, right? And that's one way you could do some mental accounting and say, okay, I need to just view this differently and see this as a payback. I'm willing to pay this back. Here, that's my payback now for whatever you experience. But in other ways, you could see it as that Saturn actually, as much awareness as that you might have around it, Saturn creates the situation, not always consciously on your part, because it works on a very subtle level. And you are either given or denied the energy to think a certain way, which makes you behave certain ways, so that you actually fulfill karma in relation to the planet Saturn or any planet. But certainly Saturn's karma seems to be, that kind of sense of payback, where I've taken somewhere and now I need to pay back. And it might be a bit like you're having something taken from you, or you're not feeling you want that experience, whatever it might be. So again, what I'm saying is, if you have any planets close here or sensitive degrees, to willingly pay back, to shift your mental focus around it and think that, okay, I'll pay this debt for a while. And at the same time, I do feel, and you might have seen this in the recent webinar I did about Saturn in Capricorn, you also cannot just focus solely on Saturn and think only about Saturn and all the problems in your life. Because if you only ever focused on Saturn in your chart, all you'll be thinking about are problems. So you need to obviously look at all the other blessings that you have. You need to look at Jupiter. You need to look at Moon, Venus. You need to look at Mercury, all these good guys. And even the nodes, what are they giving you? And the sun, the light. The sun is the most important thing. If you look at that webinar, you'll notice that it's very much about accentuating the qualities of the sun. Because if you put all your energy on Saturn, all you get back is Saturn. In other words, if you think only about the problem, all you get back is the problem. So if you put all your focus on sun as at the same time as remedying Saturn, do the remedies for Saturn, do the payback, slow down, limit yourself, bring pain intentionally into your life. That's one of the key remedies for Saturn. If it's painful, literally bring it into your life, bring some sort of pain. So the most obvious example is let me just say for Leo. If you're Leo rising and Saturn is transiting your sixth sign, better to be in pain exercising than getting the pains for not exercising. That's like Saturn in the sixth, right? But whatever Saturn is transiting in your chart, make sure that you purposely do some work there, right? Bring it in, intentionally bring it in. And when you've done that and you've done all you can, you accept obviously as much as you have done, as much as you could have done, and you accept anything beyond that happens in your life because you've done all you can. And then apart from that, you put all your focus on the sun, which is the antidote to Saturn. And we really will need the sun as an antidote to Saturn in this year, because, and if you're fortunate to live in an area that you see the sun more regularly, you're very fortunate. Unfortunately, I live in a country that is seeing less and less sun with the global warming. It's just meant weather here in Ireland. So if I can't literally get the sun, I do as many sun type activities as possible. So exercise, like all the time. Meditation is another one that I connect personally with the sun because of its position in my chart. But any sense of meditation or any meditation or thing that you do to connect to your higher self, when you're doing that thing, you feel like you're connected to that higher self, whatever that is for you. Eating sun foods that are alive. Saturn is anything that is stale or dead. So if you're eating like very heavy, devitalized foods, stale foods, it just brings your energy down. And so it's better, obviously, to bring a lot of nutrition and aliveness into your life. Another thing is watching comedies, which is a great remedy for Saturn. Just laugh, you know, just watch a lot of comedies. But rhythm is very important in relation to Saturn, because we lose our rhythm with Saturn too easily. And so the sun is rhythm. Sun is all about bringing in rhythm into our life. It moves 1 degree every day, very consistently, doesn't lose a beat. And so the sun represents music for that reason. So the best thing to uplift yourself, obviously, is to put music on and to dance or to exercise. So that's what I would say about Saturn here in anyone's chart who's feeling the heaviness of Saturn, if that's in any way impacting you in any negative way. And even if it's not impacting you negatively, I think it's important to actually bring the balance in of the sun. And this would be more so relevant in the Saturnian time of year as we head into winter here on the Northern Hemisphere. So that's my 2 cents on the month of September. And I think I will leave it there because I think I've given enough. But if you have any questions, if you're here live, please feel free to type it in, or I'll unmute you, or you can raise your hand. And for those that are listening, as always, wish you all the best for the month. And I'll see you again for October.